Do you remember the weight of a covered dish balanced on your forearm while you held the car door open with your knee? That pan was heading to a revival supper, and every woman who carried one knew exactly what was inside everybody else's. Revival week meant 7 nights of preaching and a table that bent in the middle from the food. One dish cleared the fellowship hall the moment the lid came off. Another required an open flame in the yard and a deacon who never left his post. And the final entry is not a single dish. The Black church revival built a food tradition that the modern world quietly let die. Hit subscribe because 30 dishes are about to prove it. Here are 30 Black church revival dishes that disappeared after the 1980s. Number 30, chicken and dressing. The distinction between dressing and stuffing mattered to every woman who carried a pan through those church doors. Cornbread crumbled by hand, mixed with broth from a whole bird simmering since dawn. Celery, onion, sage, and enough butter to crack the top crust when you pressed it with a fork. This was the dish that told the congregation who could cook and who was pretending. Every revival had 4 pans of it on the table, and every woman knew whose was whose. Nobody signed the foil. Nobody had to. By the 1990s, boxed stuffing mix replaced the cornbread base, and the birds came from a deli counter instead of a backyard. The pan showed up. The recipe behind it was gone. Number 29, fried corn. Fresh corn cut right off the cob with a sharp knife, then scraped to get the milk, and fried in bacon drippings with salt and pepper until the kernels turned golden and the starch caramelized into a crust at the bottom of the skillet. This was a summer dish, and revival happened in summer. A church mother could fry enough corn for 30 people in 2 skillets if she started early enough. The corn came from the garden. The drippings came from the morning's bacon. The dish cost nothing but time and a sharp blade. When fresh field corn gave way to frozen bags and canned niblets, fried corn lost the starch that made it hold together and the sweetness that only came from an ear picked that morning. Number 28, sweet potato pone. Grated raw sweet potato mixed with molasses, butter, eggs, and spices, then baked until the top turned dark and cracked and the inside stayed dense as pudding. This was older than any casserole. The texture was heavy, almost chewy, closer to a bread than a dessert, and nothing like the whipped sweet potato dishes that replaced it. Pone was an old word and an old method carried forward from plantation kitchens into church fellowship halls by women who never switched to the lighter version. When marshmallow-topped casseroles took over the holiday table, pone looked too plain and too heavy to bring. The women who still made it brought it anyway. When those women stopped coming, the dish left with them. Number 27, smothered oxtails. The butcher used to sell them for almost nothing because nobody with money wanted them. Church cooks braised them low and slow in onion gravy until the meat slid off the bone and the collagen turned the sauce thick and glossy. A single pot fed a crowd, and the bones went back into the broth for the next meal. Oxtails were the dish you brought when you wanted the deacons to remember your name. By the time food television discovered them and upscale restaurants put them on plates with microgreens, the price climbed out of reach for the families who had been cooking them for generations. The revival table lost oxtails not because the recipe disappeared, but because the ingredient became too expensive to give away. Number 26, deviled eggs, hard-boiled, halved, the yolks mashed with mustard, mayonnaise, pickle relish, salt, and paprika on top. Every woman in the congregation made them, and every woman's was slightly different. The competition was silent but absolute. Some added a pinch of sugar. Some used sweet relish instead of dill. Some piped the filling with the bag. Others spooned it. At revival, deviled eggs disappeared from the table before anything else because they were finger food in a world that otherwise required a plate and a fork. When the revival table shrank to a single potluck and store-bought deli trays replaced homemade platters, the deviled egg went from a personal statement to a grocery store's item. Number 25, 3-bean salad, green beans, wax beans, and kidney beans dressed in vinegar, sugar, oil, and diced onion. Served cold in a glass bowl, it was the one dish on the revival table that did not require a stove or an oven. A church mother could make it the night before and let it sit in the icebox until Sunday. The vinegar kept it safe in the heat, and the sugar balanced the tang into something children would eat without complaint. 3-bean salad was the dish nobody bragged about and everybody reached for. When pre-made deli salads appeared in plastic containers at the grocery store, the homemade version quietly stopped making the trip. A church revival used to last a full week. Services every evening, a visiting preacher who stayed in a deacon's spare bedroom, and dinner on the grounds after the Sunday closing. The food was not catered. It was not planned by a committee with a sign-up sheet. Every woman in that congregation cooked her best dish and brought it without being asked. The table stretched the length of the fellowship hall or the yard, and by the time grace was said, every inch of it was covered. There was no menu, there was no coordination, and somehow nothing was ever missing. That system ran on trust and pride and the understanding that your covered dish was your testimony. When churches shortened revivals to a single service, the table shrank. And when the table shrank, the dishes that needed a crowd to justify the labor stopped being made. Number 24, pickled peaches. Whole, clean peaches simmered in a sharp, sweet brine with cinnamon sticks and whole cloves until the fruit turned translucent and the liquid darkened to amber. Packed in mason jars and stored on a shelf until revival week. They arrived at the table still cold, sitting in a glass bowl next to the meat, and people ate them as a condiment between the heavy dishes. The sweet, sour bite cut through the grease of everything else on the plate. When commercial canning replaced home preserving and the old peach trees in the backyard were cut down, pickled peaches left the table. A jarred peach from the store never held a clove the same way. Number 23, fried pies. Hand-sized half moons of pastry dough filled with dried peach or apple that had been stewed with sugar and cinnamon, sealed with a fork press, and fried in lard until the crust blistered golden. They were meant to be eaten standing up, carried in a napkin, passed to a child sitting on the church steps between services. A woman who brought a basket of fried pies to revival never brought them home. The crust shattered when you bit into it, and the filling was hot enough to scald your tongue if you were not careful. When commercial snack cakes and gas station pastries filled that same slot, the homemade fried pie stopped being worth the labor. The machine-made ones were cheaper. They were also forgettable. Number 22, pig feet. This is the dish that split a revival hall down the middle. Pig feet, clean, split in half, and simmered for hours in a pot with onion, vinegar, bay leaves, and enough black pepper to darken the broth. The collagen dissolved into the liquid and turned the whole pot into a rich, sticky broth that coated everything it touched. Served in bowls with the bones still in, people pulled the meat and skin apart with their fingers. The older church mothers considered pig feet a delicacy. They arrived at the fellowship hall carrying the pot with both hands, set it down at the end of the table, and did not explain themselves. Younger members walked past without stopping. Visitors asked what it was, and the answer never helped. Eating pig feet required a willingness to work for every bite. The meat sat between small bones and tendons, and the texture ranged from silky to gelatinous depending on how long the pot had cooked. The skin turned soft enough to chew but firm enough to resist. Nothing about the experience was fast or convenient. The cost was nearly nothing. Butchers sold pig feet cheap because the demand stayed low outside of communities that still practiced whole animal cooking. A small amount of money bought enough feet to feed a table of 10 with broth left over for rice the next day. That economy was part of the point. Pig feet were a declaration that nothing from the hog went to waste and everything had value, including the parts the wider world threw away. When supermarkets stopped carrying them in the regular meat case and the generation of women who cleaned and cooked them grew too old to stand over the pot, the supply and the skill disappeared together. The women who made pig feet never switched to a substitute. There was nothing to switch to. Number 21, squash casserole. Yellow summer squash, sliced thin and boiled until soft, drained, and mixed with butter, egg, onion, salt, and enough crumbled crackers to give the top a golden crust. The squash broke down during baking into something creamy and mild, and the cracker topping crisped into a shell that cracked when a spoon went through it. This was a side dish that traveled well and sat at room temperature without falling apart. Squash came from the garden in quantities nobody could eat fresh, and the casserole was the answer to all of it. When fewer families gardened and squash became something bought by the single pound at a market, the casserole shrank from a crowd-sized pan to nothing at all. Number 20, giblet rice. The heart, liver, and gizzard from the chicken, chopped fine and cooked into the rice with onion and broth from the same bird. Nothing went unused. The giblets gave the rice a mineral depth that plain rice never reached, and the gravy that formed during cooking turned every grain dark and rich. This dish showed up at revivals because it used the parts of the chicken nobody fought over. The breast went on a platter, the thighs went on a plate, the giblets went into the rice pot, and the woman who cooked it turned what nobody wanted into something children asked for by name. When rotisserie chickens replaced home-cooked birds, the giblet bag went straight into the trash. The rice lost its engine. Number 19, chicken and dumplings. A whole bird simmered until the meat fell from the bone, pulled apart by hand, and returned to the broth. The dumplings were spooned in as rough lumps of flour, shortening, and milk dropped into the rolling liquid and covered tight. They puffed and turned soft in the steam, soaking up chicken fat and thickening the broth into something between a soup and a stew. This was a cold weather revival dish, the kind that appeared when evening services ran long and people needed something hot waiting in the fellowship hall. A single pot fed a crowd from one bird and a bag of flour. When canned cream of chicken soup became the shortcut and frozen dumplings replaced the hand-torn kind, the dish became quicker and blander. The broth lost its backbone. Number 18, lemon chess pie, sugar, butter, eggs, a splash of vinegar, a tablespoon of cornmeal, and enough lemon juice to cut through all of it. The filling set with a crackled, slightly brown top and a soft, almost translucent layer underneath. Chess pie was the dessert church mothers made when they had nothing in the house but staples. No fruit to pick, no chocolate to melt, no cream to whip, just pantry ingredients and a crust. The lemon version held up in summer heat better than custard and traveled without falling apart, which made it the revival dessert of choice in July and August. When bakeries started selling elaborately decorated cakes, a plain chess pie looked too humble to bring. Nobody wanted to be the woman who arrived with a pie that looked like nothing. Number 17, fried okra. Fresh okra sliced into coins, tossed in cornmeal with a little salt, and fried in a skillet until the coating turned crisp and the vegetable inside stayed tender. The cornmeal seal was the trick. Done right, each piece held its shape and snapped between teeth without any of the slippery texture people claim to dislike about okra. Fried okra arrived at Revival on a plate lined with paper towels, still warm, and it vanished before the fried chicken. When frozen breaded okra appeared in the grocery freezer and deep fryers replaced skillets, the texture changed completely. The frozen version was soggy inside its coating. The deep fried version lost the thin, delicate crust that only a skillet and a watchful eye could produce. Number 16, buttermilk pie. Buttermilk, sugar, eggs, butter, a little flour, and vanilla. Poured into a single crust and baked until the top puffed slightly and turned golden at the edges. The filling had a faint tang from the buttermilk that kept the sweetness from turning heavy, and the texture sat somewhere between custard and cake. This was another pantry pie made from what every kitchen already held. Church mothers baked buttermilk pies because they could make 3 at a time without a trip to the store. When the generation that baked from memory stopped coming to Revival and the next generation reached for a frozen pie from the grocery case, the buttermilk version lost its last occasion. The women who cooked for a church revival never got paid. There was no budget, no reimbursement, no line item in the church treasury for flour and cooking oil. Every ingredient came out of a family's own grocery money, and every hour of labor came out of a woman's own time. The cooking started days before the revival opened. The shopping started a week before that. And when the dishes were washed and dried and stacked, nobody said thank you because nobody had to. These women fed the congregation the same way they fed their own families, by showing up and doing the work without being asked. What disappeared after the 1980s was not just the food. It was the assumption that a church would be fed by its own members from their own kitchens without a caterer or a conversation about who was bringing what. Number 15, peach cobbler. Fresh peaches, peeled and sliced, tossed with sugar and a squeeze of lemon juice, spread in a baking dish and covered with a blanket of biscuit dough that puffed and browned in the oven. The juice bubbled up through the crust and caramelized at the edges, and the whole thing came to the revival table, still warm with a towel over the pan. Peach season and revival season overlapped in the rural South, and the women who made cobbler used fruit from their own trees or a neighbor's yard. When canned peaches replaced fresh and frozen pie crusts, replaced the biscuit topping, the cobbler survived in name only. The church version, with fruit so ripe it fell apart in the pan, became something people described but could not replicate. Number 14, corn pudding. Fresh corn cut off the cob, scraped to get the milk and mixed with eggs, butter, sugar, and just enough flour to hold it together. Baked in a casserole dish until the top set golden and the inside stayed creamy and loose. This was not creamed corn from a can. The difference was the corn milk, that starchy white liquid that came when the back of a knife ran down the stripped cob. It gave the pudding a sweetness and a body that no canned substitute could match. Corn pudding was a late summer dish, and late summer was revival season. The timing was not a coincidence. Revivals happened when the garden was producing and the pantry was full, because that was when a congregation could afford to feed itself every night for a week. The corn showed up at every one of those suppers because it did not need to be bought. It grew in the garden behind the house, and the woman who made the pudding had been watching the ears for weeks, waiting for the moment the silk turned brown and the kernels burst milky when pressed with a thumbnail. That patience was part of the recipe. When families moved to cities and the garden plot shrank to a flower bed, fresh corn meant a bag from the supermarket. The corn milk was thinner, the pudding was flatter. Some families still make a version at Thanksgiving, but none of them claim it tastes the way it did when the corn came from 10 feet outside the kitchen door. Number 13, ambrosia salad, fresh oranges peeled and sectioned by hand, mixed with shredded coconut, canned pineapple, and a fold of whipped cream. Some versions added maraschino cherries or miniature marshmallows. The dish sat in a glass bowl on the dessert end of the revival table, looking like nothing else near it. Ambrosia was a revival and holiday fixture through the 1970s, the one dish children asked for because it tasted like candy but sat on the side dish table. When ready-made fruit salads appeared in the deli section and fresh coconut became harder to find, ambrosia lost its anchor ingredient. The shredded coconut from a bag was drier and sweeter than the real thing, and the salad stopped tasting the way it had when someone cracked a whole coconut on the back step. Number 12, rice and gravy. White rice cooked until each grain stood separate, covered with a dark roux gravy made from pan drippings, flour, and onion. The gravy came from whatever meat had been roasted or fried that day, and the flavor changed depending on the source. Chicken drippings gave it a golden color. Pork gave it depth. The rice soaked it up and turned soft at the edges while the center stayed firm. Rice and gravy was the dish that made everything else on the revival table stretch further. A spoonful of rice under the oxtails, under the stew, under the greens. When instant rice and jarred gravy replaced the slow version, the dish lost the pan drippings that made it worth eating on its own. Number 11, pork backbone stew. The backbone of the hog cut into sections with a handsaw, simmered in a pot with potatoes, onion, and whatever root vegetables the garden still held. The bones released marrow into the broth, turning it milky and rich, and the meat that clung to the vertebrae pulled away in strips. Backbone was a butcher's leftover, sold cheap to families who asked for it by name. At Revival, a pot of backbone stew fed a crowd for less than any other meat dish on the table. The broth alone poured over rice was a full meal. When butchers stopped breaking down whole hogs and the bones went straight to rendering plants, the cut vanished from the counter. The stew disappeared the same season. Number 10, boiled custard. Eggs, sugar, milk, and vanilla cooked slowly in a double boiler, stirred without stopping until the mixture thickened just enough to cling to wood. Strained through cheesecloth and chilled overnight. This was a drinking custard, served cold in small cups at the dessert table. The texture was thinner than pudding, but richer than eggnog, and the vanilla hit differently because the egg yolks had been cooked, not raw. Church mothers who made boiled custard stood over that double boiler for the better part of an hour, stirring in one direction, never rushing. One moment of high heat and the eggs scrambled. When instant pudding and store-bought eggnog covered the same craving with less effort, boiled custard lost its place. Number 9, bread pudding, stale bread torn into pieces, soaked in a mixture of eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, and cinnamon, then baked until the top crisped and the inside turned custard soft. This was a dish built entirely from what would otherwise have been thrown away. Old biscuits, day-old dinner rolls, the heels nobody wanted, all of it went into the pan. At Revival, bread pudding sat on the dessert table beside the cakes and pies, and it held its own because the texture was something none of them could match. Dense, warm, and soaked through with spice. When families stopped baking their own bread and the stale scraps disappeared from the counter, bread pudding lost its raw material. Store-bought bread was too soft and too uniform to give the pudding any structure. Number 8, the outdoor fish fry. This was not a single dish. This was an event inside the event. A deacon or a crew of men set up a propane burner in the church yard with a cast iron pot full of peanut oil, catfish, fillets, fresh from somebody's freezer or caught that week, dredged in seasoned cornmeal and dropped into the oil one piece at a time. The rule was simple. The fish went in when the oil snapped back and it came out when it floated. Nobody used a thermometer. Nobody set a timer. The men who ran the fish fry had been doing it long enough to judge the oil by sound and the fish by color. Children sat on the tailgates of pickup trucks eating catfish with white bread and hot sauce, and the line at the pot never got shorter because the oil never stopped popping. The fish fry was the only part of the revival meal cooked on site in real time with people watching. Everything else arrived in a covered dish. This was live cooking, public cooking. The deacon standing over that pot in the heat, sweat rolling down his neck, turning fillets with a wire skimmer, was feeding the congregation with his own hands, and everybody knew his name. When liability concerns and church insurance policies began restricting open flames on church property, the fish fry moved indoors or stopped altogether. A catfish fried in a commercial kitchen and delivered in a warming tray is not the same meal. The men who ran those outdoor pots understood that, and most of them never picked up a skimmer again once the fire was taken away. Number 7, candied sweet potatoes. Whole sweet potatoes, peeled, sliced, thick, and layered in a baking dish with butter and brown sugar. Baked low and slow until the sugar melted into a dark, sticky glaze and the potatoes softened but held their shape. Some women added a splash of vanilla or a squeeze of orange juice to cut the sweetness. This dish looked simple on the table but required patience in the oven. Rushed at high heat, the sugar scorched and the potatoes turned to mush. Done right, each slice lifted clean with a spoon, coated in a glaze that tasted like molasses and warm butter. When canned yams in heavy syrup became the shortcut, the baked version with fresh potatoes quietly left the revival table. The canned ones were close enough for a Wednesday. They were never close enough for Sunday. Number 6, buttermilk biscuits. Not from a tube, not from a mix. Flour, lard, buttermilk, a pinch of baking soda, and hands that knew when the dough was right without measuring a thing. A church mother could turn out 60 biscuits in 40 minutes, cutting them with a juice glass and sliding them onto greased sheet pans. They rose tall and split open with a pull, ready for butter or potlikker or a fold of ham. Biscuits were the foundation of every revival table. They sat next to everything and went with everything. When frozen biscuits and canned dough arrived on the grocery shelf, the scratch version stopped being worth the flour on the counter. The time saved was real. The taste lost was something nobody talked about until it was too late to get it back. Number 5, pound cake. A true pound cake weighed almost as much as a brick. Butter, sugar, flour, eggs, and nothing else. No leavening, no frosting. The rise came from the air beaten into the batter, and the fall came from opening the oven door too soon. Church mothers carried them on plates covered with a clean towel, and the cake sat on the dessert table unsliced until someone in charge cut it with authority. Pound cake judged the baker. Dense and moist meant skill. Dry and crumbly meant impatience. When boxed cake mixes and layered cakes with store-bought frosting took over the dessert table, a plain pound cake looked like it had not tried hard enough. The women who baked them knew the difference between effort and decoration. Number 4, hot water cornbread. cornmeal mixed with boiling water and a pinch of salt, shaped by hand into small oval patties and fried in a skillet until the outside turned brown and crisp and the inside stayed soft and dense. The boiling water was the difference. It cooked the cornmeal before the skillet did, which gave the bread a texture no baked cornbread could match. Hot water cornbread was a hand-formed thing. Every patty came out shaped by the woman who made it, slightly different each time, with the edges rough where the batter pressed through her fingers. At Revival, it sat on a plate beside the greens, and people tore it in half and dropped one piece into the Potlikker. When the women who shaped it stopped coming to church, the skill went with their hands. Number 3, turnip greens and Potlikker. Turnip greens stripped from the stem, washed in cold water until the grit was gone, and cooked low with a smoked ham hock for hours until the leaves turned silk soft and the broth darkened into something closer to gravy than water. The Potlikker was never thrown away. People drank it from a cup or poured it over cornbread, and the flavor carried every mineral the greens had released during the long cook. Turnip greens were sharper and more bitter than collards, and that bite was the whole appeal. At Revival, they sat in a deep pot with a ladle, and the line circled back twice. When bagged pre-washed greens and 30-minute recipes replaced the all-day cook, the Potlikker thinned out. A short simmer does not pull what an 8-hour cook surrenders. Number 2, caramel cake. 3 layers of yellow cake with a poured caramel icing that started as sugar cooked dry in a heavy pot until it turned the color of dark honey. Butter and cream stirred in, then beaten until it thickened enough to pour over the layers without running off the sides. The icing set with a slight pull, glossy and smooth if the baker timed it right, grainy and dull if she waited too long. Making caramel icing was the most unforgiving task in Southern baking. 30 seconds too long and the sugar burned. A few seconds too early and the icing never set. Women who could pour a caramel cake earned a reputation in that church that followed them for the rest of their lives. When store-bought frosting made the 3-layer cake effortless, the art of cooking sugar down went with the generation that refused to cut a corner. Number 1, dinner on the grounds. This is not a dish. This is the table itself. An entire congregation eating together, outdoors, on folding tables under shade trees, with every family contributing whatever they made best. No assigned dishes, no purchased food. Just trust that enough would show up and that the women who cooked would bring their finest. Dinner on the grounds was the reason every dish on this list existed. The food was not made for a family. It was made for a church. When the full week revival ended and Sunday services moved indoors to air-conditioned fellowship halls with purchased meals, the table disappeared and every covered dish that once sat on it went with it. Number 28, ambrosia with sour cream. The 1960s church version had nothing to do with the airy whipped cream ambrosia that took over by the 1990s. The Sunday school teachers drained 2 cans of Dolly pineapple chunks, 1 jar of maraschino cherries, and a tin of mandarin oranges into a yellow Pyrex bowl. They folded in sweetened baker's coconut and a generous cup of Daisy sour cream, then chilled it overnight in the icebox. Some women added halved pecans from a backyard tree. It came to the fellowship hall in the same Pyrex it was made in, wrapped in a clean dish towel. Spooned next to ham, it cut the salt with something cold and tangy and faintly tropical. By 1978, the sour cream was gone, replaced by Cool Whip, and the old version was lost. Number 19, field peas with snaps. Field peas were among the most important crops in the rural Black South during the Depression, and the church kitchen turned them into something that went far beyond survival. The peas were picked fresh in summer, shelled by hand on the front porch by whoever was available, children included, and cooked in a deep pot with a piece of salt pork or a smoked ham hock for seasoning. The snaps were the immature pods that had not fully developed peas inside. They went into the pot whole, adding a green, slightly fibrous texture that balanced the starchy richness of the mature peas. Low heat, enough water to cover, and patience. By the time they were done, the broth had thickened into a creamy liquid that tasted like pork and earth in summer all at once. In the church context, field peas were democratic. They grew in nearly every garden, required no expensive fertilizer, and a single bushel could feed a congregation. Women brought them already cooked in large bowls covered with dish towels. The potlikker was soaked up with cornbread, and the peas were served alongside whatever meat was available that Sunday. In years when there was no meat, the peas were the meal. Protein, iron, fiber, all from a crop that grew in poor soil and asked for almost nothing in return. Black farmers had been growing them for generations before any government extension program said a word about it. The knowledge did not come from a pamphlet, it came from the ground. And the church table was where that knowledge fed people who had nowhere else to turn. A pot of field peas with snaps, served with cornbread and a glass of cold water, was a complete meal. It did not look like much. It did not need to. Number 27, string beans with new potatoes. A heavy pot on the back burner, simmering for hours with a smoked ham hock or a piece of fatback dropped in for flavor. The beans went soft, the potatoes went tender, and the potlikker at the bottom turned into something people drank from a cup when they thought nobody was watching. This was an all-day commitment. The beans were snapped by hand, usually by whoever was sitting on the porch that morning, and the potatoes were small ones, dug fresh if there was a garden. The modern version with crisp green beans and a squeeze of lemon would not have been recognized in these kitchens. Number 26, souse loaf. Souse was the Saturday work that produced the Sunday platter. The church fathers boiled a whole hog head with the cheeks, ears, and snout in a covered pot of vinegar water, bay leaf, hot pepper, and salt for almost 5 hours. The meat fell off the bone, got chopped fine, and went back into the pot with its own gelatin. It set up overnight in bread loaf pans into a tangy, trembling block, streaked pink and white. Sliced thin onto saltines, it traveled to every potluck table in the rural Black South through 1967. By the 1980s, the hog heads were harder to source, and souse left the fellowship hall for good. Number 22, pear salad. This was one of the strangest looking dishes on the church table and one of the most beloved. A canned pear, half place cut side up on a leaf of iceberg lettuce, the hollow filled with a spoonful of mayonnaise, and the whole thing topped with a sprinkle of grated cheddar cheese. That was it. Canned pears were cheap and available year-round at any general store. The dish required no cooking, no oven, and no skill beyond opening a can and arranging a plate. Church women assembled dozens of them on long trays before the congregation arrived. Children ate them with their fingers. Adults pretended not to. The combination of cold, sweet fruit, sharp cheese, and mayonnaise made no sense on paper, but made perfect sense on a paper plate at a summer revival. Number 29, turnip greens, sharper than collards, with a peppery bite that woke up the whole plate. Cooked the same way, low and slow in a heavy pot with a smoked ham hock or a piece of salt pork, but the flavor landed differently. Turnip greens had a mineral edge that made them stand apart on a table crowded with milder sides. Some families cooked the turnip roots alongside the greens and mashed them separately with butter. Others threw the roots away and kept only the leaves. Either way, the pot liquor at the bottom was dark and smoky, and cornbread went into it before the meal was halfway done. Number 27, liver pudding. Up through about 1968, a slab of cold liver pudding showed up on every Carolina church potluck table, sliced thick and laid out on saltines with hot sauce. The deacons made it from pork liver, head meat, cornmeal, sage, and black pepper, cooked down in a tall stock pot for half a Saturday, then poured into loaf pans to set in the spring house. A pound cost about 30 cents at the country market. The young ushers ate it cold straight off the cracker. The elders fried it in slices. After integration brought new grocery brands into the South, store liverwurst quietly replaced it. The home recipe walked out with the women who knew it. Number 23, collard greens with ham hocks. The pot started early Saturday morning. A smoked ham hock went into a deep stock pot with water, and it simmered for hours until the meat slid off the bone and the broth turned dark and rich. Then the collards went in, washed 3 or 4 times to get the grit out, stripped from the thick center stems, torn by hand into rough pieces. They cooked low and slow until they were tender enough to cut with the side of a fork. The pot liquor at the bottom was as important as the greens themselves. Church members soaked cornbread in it, drank it from a cup, saved it for the next pot of rice. During the Depression, collard greens grew in nearly every backyard garden in the rural South. They cost nothing and fed everyone. Number 30, butter beans. Large flat lima beans simmered in a pot with a ham hock, onion, salt, and black pepper until the beans went soft and the cooking liquid turned into a thick, creamy broth. Butter beans broke down more than any other bean in the pot, and that breakdown was the whole point. The starch released into the liquid and thickened it naturally, so the broth clung to a spoon without flour or cream. They sat on the Sunday table in a deep bowl, the beans pale and swollen, the broth pooled beneath them. A piece of cornbread went into that broth before a fork touched anything else. Number 29, chow chow relish. By 1963, every fellowship hall in the rural South had at least 3 jars of homemade chow chow lined up next to the cornbread platter, each one labeled with masking tape and a different woman's last name. The church mothers chopped end-of-season green tomatoes, white cabbage, sweet onion, and red bell pepper from their own backyard rows, then packed it all into pint jars with brine made from cider vinegar, white sugar, yellow mustard seed, celery seed, and a thumb of turmeric. The pot simmered on the back of the stove all afternoon. It cured for 3 weeks in a back pantry shelf before it ever met a plate of pintos. A spoonful of bright yellow chow chow on top of hot beans and a wedge of cornbread was Tuesday supper at home and Sunday dinner at church. The mason jars went home empty and washed. Almost nobody under 60 has tasted real homemade chow chow since 1985. Number 20, glazed ham. A whole ham at a black church supper during the Depression was a statement. It meant somebody had raised a hog and done the smoking themselves. The glaze was made from whatever sweetener was available: brown sugar, sorghum, or cane syrup mixed with mustard and a little vinegar. Whole cloves were pressed into the scored fat in diamond patterns. The ham went into the oven and was basted every 30 minutes until the outside turned dark and glossy. A single ham fed 40 people when carved thin enough. The children circled back for the burnt edges where the sugar had caramelized against the bone. When the ham was gone, the supper was over. The bone went home with whoever was making soup that week. Here's something worth saying out loud. The black church during the Great Depression was not simply a place of worship, it was a survival system. When federal relief programs offered almost nothing to Black families, and when white relief agencies turned them away, the church filled the gap with the only currency it had: food. Women who could barely feed their own children cooked for entire congregations. They pooled flour and lard the way banks were supposed to pool money. They organized meal rotations so no family went an entire week without a hot plate. The recipes on this list did not come from cookbooks. They came from necessity and the absolute refusal to let hunger win on a Sunday. Number 25, hot water cornbread pones. Forget the sweet yellow square that bakeries call cornbread now. In 1962, the church kitchen produced hand-shaped pones made by pouring scalding water straight into white stone ground cornmeal with a teaspoon of salt and a heavy finger of bacon grease whisked in. The cornmeal cooked from the heat of the water alone. The deaconesses shaped the warm dough into oblong patties between two cupped palms, leaving the marks of their fingerprints in the sides, and fried them in a flat skillet of pure white lard until the outside cracked open golden and the inside steamed white. They went to the long fellowship table 6 pones to a platter wrapped in a clean flour sack to stay hot. Crisp outside, soft as wet grits inside. They needed nothing but cold butter and the Potlikker from a pot of collard greens. By 1980, almost no Sunday school child in town had ever eaten one. Number 24, chicken hash. This was not the brunch item served in hotel restaurants today. In Black church kitchens, during the 1930s, chicken hash meant taking every last scrap off a bird that had already given its broth to Sunday soup. The leftover meat was chopped fine, mixed with diced potatoes and onion, seasoned with salt, black pepper, and sage, then fried in a cast iron skillet with bacon drippings until the bottom turned crisp. The dish stretched one chicken across 2 meals for a family of 6. The crisp bottom layer was scraped up with a spatula and served alongside the soft hash on top. Simple, resourceful, and completely invisible to anyone who did not grow up watching a grandmother strip a carcass bare with her fingers. Number 28, fried okra. Fresh okra sliced into rounds, tossed in cornmeal with salt and pepper, and fried in a cast iron skillet until the coating turned golden and crunchy. The slime that kept people away from okra disappeared completely in hot oil. High heat and a dry cornmeal coat solved it. Fried okra came out of the skillet onto a paper towel and went on the table in the same bowl. Children who refused boiled okra ate the fried version by the handful, and by the time the table was cleared, the bowl was empty. Number 23, salmon croquette loaf. By 1966, a flat tin can of pink salmon cost about 45 cents at the country grocery, and that one can fit a whole pew of children at the fellowship hall. The church ladies mashed the pink salmon with its soft bones and skin still in, mixed in finely chopped sweet onion, 2 beaten eggs, a sleeve of crushed saltine crumbs, and yellow cornmeal. They patted the whole thing into a single shallow loaf pan and baked it at 375 degrees instead of frying 20 separate patties one by one. Cut into squares, drizzled with a thin flour and milk pan gravy, it stretched a single can across 30 paper plates. The leftover pieces went home in tin foil for Monday school lunches. After the price of canned salmon doubled in the late 1970s, the loaf disappeared and only the pricier pan-fried croquettes survived. Number 21, tea cakes. Before store-bought cookies existed in most Black communities, there were tea cakes, large, flat, round, barely sweet, flavored with vanilla and a little nutmeg. The dough was rolled out on a floured table and cut with the rim of a drinking glass. Church mothers baked them by the dozens for Sunday school, funerals, and revivals. The recipe required flour, sugar, butter or lard, eggs, and buttermilk. Children waited at the kitchen door while the first batch cooled on a piece of brown paper. A batch of tea cakes could be made for pennies and lasted an entire week, stored in a tin can with a tight lid. The flavor was plain by modern standards, but the smell of them baking was the smell of somebody's house on a Saturday afternoon. Number 30, tomato aspic salad. Nothing tells you 1965 was a different country, quite like a quivering red mold of tomato juice unmolded onto a glass plate at a Sunday potluck. The church mothers made it the night before, dissolving plain Knox gelatin into a saucepan of V8 and Worcestershire, folding in chopped celery, green pepper, and one diced hard-boiled egg. They poured the whole thing into a fluted ring mold borrowed from the women's auxiliary. By Sunday morning, it had set firm enough to slice. The fellowship hall ladies arranged it on a bed of iceberg with a dollop of Hellmann's in the center hole. It looked like jewelry. It tasted like cold seasoned tomato soup with a backbone. A staple from 1955 to about 1972, then it quietly vanished from the tables. Number 18, banana pudding. Every black church supper during the Depression had a dessert table, and banana pudding sat at the center of it. The recipe was simple: vanilla wafers, sliced bananas, and a custard made from eggs, sugar, milk, and a little flour layered in a baking dish and topped with meringue browned in the oven. Bananas were cheap. By the 1930s, United Fruit had flooded American markets with Central American bananas at prices even the poorest families could afford. A bunch cost a few pennies. The wafers came from a box. The custard required nothing exotic, yet the finished dish tasted rich, creamy, and almost luxurious. Church women assembled it hours before the meal, letting the wafers soften into the custard until the layers blurred together. The meringue on top turned golden and slightly wept in the summer heat. Children fought over the corners of the dish where the custard had thickened against the glass. Number 24, pickled pig's feet. In the 1964 fellowship hall, the pink jar of pickled pig's feet sat at the corner of the table next to the saltines and the hot sauce. The trotters were boiled tender for 3 hours with onion, bay, and clove, then packed into wide-mouthed mason jars and covered with hot vinegar, sugar, and red pepper flakes. They cured a full week before anybody touched them. Eaten cold off the fork after Sunday service, they were tangy, gelatinous, and faintly sweet. The men's chorus would crowd that end of the table first. By the 1990s, the home version had given way to the gas station jar. That table ran on faith and flour and the understanding that nobody walks into a fellowship hall with nothing in her hands. Every dish on this list required a kitchen, a congregation, and a woman who treated a covered pan like a covenant. Pick one, look up how it was made, cook it this week, even if the table only seats one, and drop the dish your family always brought to revival in the comments, because if it only lives in your memory, it is one generation away from being gone for good.